Year 1872. The Atlantic Ocean. A ship drifting across the open sea. Its sails are raised. No damage to the hull. The sea is calm. But on the ship, there isn't a single human being. This ship was not abandoned. This ship was not hijacked. This ship did not sink. The people on this ship disappeared. Its name, Mary Celeste. And this ship would become one of the most disturbing mysteries in history. Now stop. Think about this. When everything on a ship is fine, when the food is still there, when the lifeboat is intact, why would people abandon the ship in the middle of the ocean? Mary Celeste had set sail from New York to Italy. Year 1872. Cargo, alcohol barrels. Crew, 7 sailors. Captain, Benjamin Briggs. And on board were the captain's wife and young daughter. So this wasn't just a business voyage. This was a family journey. Captain Briggs was experienced. He knew the sea. He knew storms. He knew danger. And everyone who knew him said the same thing. He would never abandon his ship without a reason. Pasha Mary Celeste entered the Atlantic. The first days, everything was normal. Logs were kept. The route was steady. The weather was calm. The last entry, November 25th, 1872. And after that, silence. About a month later, another ship sailing across the Atlantic noticed something strange. A ship, moving without control, sails raised but directionless. When they got closer, they saw this, Mary Celeste, but there was no one on deck. They boarded the ship, and at that moment, this stopped being a maritime mystery and became a nightmare. The dining table was set, plates were in place, food was untouched, as if the people had stood up and left all at once. The captain's cabin was orderly. His belongings were there. His money was there. Weapons were untouched. So this was not an attack. The lifeboat was missing. But this is crucial. The lifeboat had been lowered deliberately. No panic marks, no breakage, no forced damage. Now ask yourself, if the ship was sinking, if there was a fire, if there was an attack, why was there no rush? And it gets stranger. The alcohol barrels were still there, but some of their lids were open. The cargo was intact. No explosion, no fire, but it was as if they were expecting something to happen. The logs were examined. The final entries were calm, no fear, no danger, no emergency. And that was the most disturbing part, because people usually flee from danger. But on Mary Celeste, there was no danger. So the real question is, why did these people choose something far more dangerous in the middle of the ocean? And we still don't know this. What made them leave the ship? And this is where things get darker. Because there was minor damage to the hull. It was insignificant, but it was the kind of damage that would catch a captain's attention. And Captain Briggs was not someone who liked taking risks. If he suspected even the smallest thing, he would take precautions. But abandoning the entire ship? That would be a last resort. Now think, in what scenario would a captain abandon his ship with his family on board? And this is where the haunting question appears. Did these people see something? Among sailors, there is a belief. Some things are not spoken, some things are not written, and some things are seen but never explained. On Mary Celeste, no note was left, no message, no warning, as if there wasn't time to explain. Up to this point, you can still make logical explanations, but soon, this story will move beyond logic, because next we must consider these possibilities. Fear of an explosion, toxic gas, a sea creature, or something misunderstood by the crew. But know this, none of them alone explain every detail. And that's why Mary Celeste is not just a ghost ship, it is a case study of how humans make decisions when facing the unknown. Up to now, you might still say, this makes sense, but soon, things will change. Now, from this point on, the logical explanations are put on the table. But be careful, each one explains a piece, none explain the whole. First theory, fear of an alcohol vapor explosion. Mary Celeste was carrying industrial alcohol, highly flammable, Some barrels had open lids. This could mean alcohol vapor had spread inside the ship. If vapor accumulates, the smallest spark means an explosion. The captain may have realized this and may have decided, let's ventilate the ship, but cautiously. According to this theory, the crew boarded the lifeboat. They stayed tied to the ship by a rope. They planned to return once the danger passed, but they never returned. Why? Did the rope snap? Did a storm rise? Did currents pull them away? The problem is, the ship showed no signs of explosion, no burns, no structural damage, and the captain knew this. So this theory starts strong but collapses halfway. Second theory, toxic gas. Alcohol vapor is not just explosive, it's also suffocating. Maybe the crew struggled to breathe. Maybe they became dizzy. Maybe panic set in. But again, a problem. If gas caused this, there would be chaotic escape. Objects would be scattered. Signs of panic would exist. But on Mary Celeste, there was order. This was not instinct. This was a decision. Third theory, a storm. But records are clear. There was no major storm in that region at the time, and the ship showed no storm damage. Fourth theory, pirates, but valuables were untouched. Cargo was intact, no signs of struggle. So pirates? No. Fifth theory, mutiny. But Captain Briggs was firm yet fair, and his family was on board. If there had been a mutiny, there would be evidence, but there was none. Do you see it now? Every theory hits a wall, and this is where the most unsettling possibility emerges. A misinterpreted threat. Sometimes people don't flee from real danger, but from something they believe is dangerous. Maybe a sound, maybe a vibration, maybe an unexplainable feeling in the middle of the night. Sailors call it a sixth sense, and some captains trust it. Maybe Captain Briggs believed staying on the ship was more dangerous, but he was wrong. And here's a critical detail. When Mary Celeste was found, it had slightly drifted off course, which means someone had deliberately steered it last. That means the final moments were under control. And then, something happened. The lifeboat. The lifeboat was never found. No wreckage, no trace. The ocean hides everything, but to erase something completely is difficult. If the lifeboat capsized, if it sank, they were lost at sea. But that raises another question. Why didn't they return to the ship? Because Mary Celeste had not drifted far. They had a chance to go back, but they didn't, which strengthens one possibility. They didn't want to return. And now we approach the most disturbing part. Mary Celeste was later put back into service. Same ship, different crews. But this time, no one wanted to stay on it for long. Sailors claimed they heard sounds at night. Some said, something is wrong with this ship. And years later, Mary Celeste was abandoned entirely. Because some ships are not terrifying because of their cargo, but because of the story they carry. Up to now, you can still call this an unfortunate chain of decisions. But one final question remains, and this question changes everything. If Captain Briggs deliberately left the ship with his family, what convinced him? Fear of an explosion or an unseen threat? Because sometimes the sea doesn't kill people. It simply forces them to make the wrong decision. Soon we'll connect why this mystery can never be fully solved and why it's still discussed today. And in the end, you'll be left with this question. Did these people really want to escape? Or were they meant to leave? Now we've reached the most unsettling point of the story. Because now we're not asking what might have happened, but what could not have happened. And as the options narrow, what remains is deeply uncomfortable. When Mary Celeste was found, December 4th, 1872, the ship De Gracia encountered an empty vessel in the Atlantic. Sails raised, course is steady, but no people. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, his young daughter, and the crew were completely gone. When they boarded the ship, the first thing noticed was this. Everything was in place. The dining table stood. Personal belongings remained. The valuable cargo, alcohol barrels, untouched. Some cabins even had unfinished tasks. This was important because it didn't look like a ship abandoned in panic. This was a deliberate departure. So the question changes. If everything was normal, why did they leave? The lifeboat. The only missing thing was the lifeboat, but it wasn't damaged, not forced, lowered cleanly, consciously. This means there was a perceived threat, but not yet a disaster. Captain Briggs was an experienced sailor. He sensed a risk large enough to put his wife and child into the lifeboat. But what was it? What the logs say the ship's log was found. And here, things become even stranger. The final entries were calm, no panic, no storm, no attack. Just routine sailing notes, as if written in the middle of an ordinary journey. This is disturbing because people fleeing death don't keep journals. The most logical scenario. Most experts focus on this theory. The alcohol barrels, the alcohol was high proof. Some barrels may have leaked. This could have created fear of an explosion. If the captain believed an explosion was imminent, he may have temporarily moved everyone to the lifeboat. But there's a critical flaw. If this was temporary, why didn't they return? The sea doesn't calculate. The lifeboat was not tied to the ship. If the wind shifts, if currents change, the ship drifts away. And if that happened, Mary Celeste may have slowly drifted away from them, silently, unnoticed. Now imagine this. You're in a small lifeboat in the middle of the ocean with your family, and your ship slowly disappears over the horizon. This is where panic begins, but after that, there are no records. No bodies, no lifeboat, which means the sea swallowed the rest. But questions remain. Why did the captain take such a risk? Why did no one stay behind? Why was there no return plan? And the most disturbing question, what if the captain was wrong? What if there was never going to be an explosion? This is where the story stops being just a maritime disaster. It becomes a story about how human decisions in uncertainty can be fatal. But still, something is missing, because some details cannot be explained by wrong decisions alone. Now there is nothing left to look back on. We've placed everything we know side by side, and now it's time to connect the pieces. This was not a single moment. The Mary Celeste incident did not happen in 1 second. It was not an attack, not an explosion, not a storm. It was a chain of decisions, and every chain breaks somewhere. The captain's perspective. Benjamin Briggs was not an ordinary captain. He was religious, disciplined, family-oriented, the last person to panic, and that's exactly what makes his decision so disturbing. Because this was not irrational, it may have been overcautious. Sometimes danger isn't real. Sometimes people don't flee real threats, but possibilities. And possibilities, especially in the middle of the ocean, become far more terrifying in the human mind. That's what likely happened on Mary Celeste. Maybe a smell, maybe a sound, maybe a leak, but a strong enough suspicion is enough to abandon everything. The biggest mistake. If the lifeboat had been tied to the ship, if even one person had stayed behind, if just one precaution had been taken, this story would never be told. But they all left together, and that's what turned this into a legend. The sea does not forgive the ocean, allows no mistakes. Once you leave, there is no return. Mary Celeste continued his journey, crewless, silent, but intact. And perhaps the most frightening truth is this: the ship survived, the people did not. Why the conspiracies never end? Because the human mind hates emptiness. When there is no answer, it creates stories, monsters, ghosts, aliens. But sometimes the truth is more disturbing than all of them. The truth might be this: this was not supernatural, not military, not a deliberate attack. It was a misjudgment. And when a misjudgment is made at the wrong time in the wrong place, the result is deadly. And maybe Mary Celeste teaches us this. Humans don't flee what they don't know. They flee what they think they know. One final thought. Close your eyes. Night. Ocean. Your family beside you. There's a possibility, not certain, but risky. Do you stay, or do you leave everything behind? Mary Celeste is the answer to that question, and that answer is not comforting at all. The video ends here, but the story is still drifting across the ocean, just like a crewless ship.